And we're back, and we're moving into our second conversation for today. Another critically important point, talking about another vulnerable population in our society, and that is persons who are victims of human trafficking. There is an entire committee set up to be able to address this particular issue. It is the ATIPS committee.
Council.
The ATIPS Council,
Yes,
thank you.
that's okay.
And we have the focal point with us, Juana Murillo. And we have Karen Kane, who is the Director of the Youth Enhancement Services, who also works in educating and building awareness and assisting in ATIP's efforts. Right. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
So nice to be here.
It is.
Yeah, very important conversation. People are not property. It just seems like one of these no-brainer statements that we should be able to say, why is it even necessary to have a campaign named this way? But human trafficking is a problem globally, and it is a problem in this country. Set the backdrop for us.
So when we think of human trafficking, I know sometimes we often think there's no way that this thing happens in our little country, Belize. Right. Mm-hmm. We are excused from some of these heinous things, but it does happen. And trafficking, we see, is essentially at its core exploiting vulnerabilities in populations that are looking for something better. Yeah. So we see persons from the LGBT community, migrants, persons that are in poverty, where there's social inequalities. And when you think of trafficking in persons, that's what you want to think of. And at the very end of it, what makes it different from other crimes is that it exploits people. Yeah. So the purpose is for exploitation. That's what makes it different from any other type of gender-based violence, like sexual assault or domestic violence.
You know, it's been called modern-day slavery. One of the interesting things about trafficking victims that I do know is that we may see them and interact with them and not know that they're a victim of trafficking. And that's kind of just how it's set up. And let's talk about some of the ways that you see trafficking happening in Belize. Right.
From my perspective, what I have seen in terms of trafficking in Belize is that, like Jana said, it has three elements within it. And one is the purpose of labor exploitation, so that's how it manifests itself here. Usually in the agricultural fields, sometimes in construction, and even domestic servitude. So, and again, the person or the victim is being exploited and somebody else is gaining from that exploitation. Yeah. And then the big one that I think we see a lot of is the sexual exploitation. Yeah. And we have young girls who are being exploited in that way. We have young boys who are being exploited in that way. And at the end of the day, it is something that we really need to look at and see how we can combat that. We know worldwide that we have at least, the last reading that I did was like 1.2 million children have been exploited worldwide. Wow. So that's a big, big deal. And in our little country, we see exploitation not only within brothels, but also within locally on the CSEC front, where we have sugar daddy and the sugar mama syndrome.
Where families.
Right, where families exploit their own children. So it is a big deal in our country, and we at the ATIPS Council is looking at ways, always looking at innovative ways of how to combat such a dreadful crime against our young children.
Forgive me for perhaps asking a basic question.
That's fine.
But when I'm thinking about trafficking in persons, my mind begins to think about traffic and mobilization and a sort of movement. Where does the term trafficking comes from when what I'm hearing us talking about is exploitation? And what's the difference between trafficking in person and perhaps human trafficking?
Okay, so it's the same thing. Trafficking in persons and human smuggling. Human trafficking is the same thing.
Okay.
Okay, let's look at the technical definition. That might bring a lot of clarity for you. So when you think of human trafficking or trafficking in persons, you think of act, that is what is done, means, how it is done, and purpose, why it is done. And the act is where you have like the recruitment, the transportation, the harboring, receiving persons. And then the means is where you have the deception or the fraud or the abuse of power, and then the final one where you have the purpose, which is for exploitation. And this is exploitation comes in so many different forms. Ms. Kane, it looks like sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, illegal organ industry, pimping, pandering, all of these things. But in Belize, what we've seen, like what Ms. Kane said, is the labor and the sex exploitation. It does beg the question then, what makes it different from human smuggling?
Right.
And human smuggling is a crime against the state. So you think of human smuggling as you breaking the immigration laws of a country. So you're not giving that country the right to determine who enters and exits, essentially. Yeah. But persons that pay to be smuggled or to come across the border can become victims of trafficking in persons. They're very vulnerable because a smuggler could also be a trafficker or could be a recruiter.
Yeah. And that's the problem. It's so complex.
It is. It's super complex, and it's not a one-size-fits-all type of solution.
Yeah, yeah. So when you talk about people who, okay, let's differentiate at least two scenarios.
Okay.
People who come into the country and are trafficked for sexual work, and so for sex work. So they come in, they think they're going to get a different job. They're smuggled into the country, trafficked into the country, end up working for an employer, half forced into being a sex worker. And I know some of the key markers are taking away passport and privileges of moving around.
Right.
Then you have other people who come in and get forced into agriculture, construction, or even they're made into a house slave.
Right, right.
So when you see someone in a brothel, or when you see somebody who is a domestic in a house, because they're moving around freely, we on the outside look at them and say, okay, well, there's no forced action taking place there. So how do you identify these victims in order to help them?
Okay, so I think I want to bring attention to a little poster that we have, what we've created at the, I don't know if you could zoom in here, that we've created at the council. And it looks at some of the key signs that you could think of when trying to identify this crime. Because like you said, we're not going to see people in chains. That's not how it's going to present itself. We're not going to see people all bogged up in one area. You're going to see persons that can move around, but you don't know what it looks like. One of the identifying factors that we notice is that that person has very little personal belongings, even when they're walking on the street. Because it limits their access to anything, and it has the trafficker maintain control on their end. So not having money for themselves, or not having a cell phone, they're not having access to enter the house on their own. So that taking away the control to kind of move on their own, even though they're on the street, is one of the things that you notice. Another thing that you would find, and I'll use this as an example, if the person has untreated injuries. So a trafficker will not take a victim to the hospital because we know doctors, nurses are monitor reporters.
Yes.
So when you find that, so you look on someone's hand and there's a bruise and there's no treatment to it, or you're having a conversation and they complain about these weird injuries, and they have a certain age, that is like a red flag, because why are you 13, 15 having immense back pain or shoulder pain? What type of work are you doing that would cause these types of pain?
Just to interject,
Go ahead, no
Jana, you're talking about the back pains and the bruises and all of that. And I could remember in one of our trainings that we did some years ago, we learned that to punish these victims when they step out of line, basically, they are beaten under their clothes, so you can see the bruises, right? And so if you see a person, again, like Jana is saying, who has bruises and they cannot be explained why these bruises are maybe in the upper torso or wherever they are, these are big red flags. And then you have another incident where these victims never look you straight in the eye. You know, they always kind of head bent down and not making eye contact. Another red flag would be if they are accompanied by someone to the hospital, rarely do they explain their injuries or what is wrong with them. That person that accompanied them
Does it
is
for them.
usually the one talking on their behalf. And if you notice something like that, those should send up some
Red flag.
concerns, right? Because
Why is an individual not
talking
Right.
speaking up
for
themselves?
someone else who is old enough to explain and express herself.
And when
So-
they're having conversations as well, they're very limited and one word. They don't try to explain anything because they've already been told, watch what you say, because someone is also monitoring them.
So there's just this immense fear.
Yes,
Yes.
It's
and
a
that's
submission, a fear.
right. That's the fear to keep you paralyzed, to keep
Right.
you in place. You know, some traffickers even use drugs to to let them not be able to move and talk and like always be in this zombie state that they can be controlled. Because at the end of the day, I want to minimize that person running away. I want to minimize the fact that he or she is not always in his or her right faculties, so that I can explain what is happening to me. And then on the other hand of explaining, sometimes there's a language barrier. Because here I am maybe from another Central American state and I was thrust into an English-speaking country, although we have a large amount of our own population who speaks Spanish, right? But that is always a barrier, the language as well.
And what they would also do, the trafficker would lie to them about their access to help. So they say, if you go to police, we are reported to immigration and they are carry you.
Yes.
Which is a lie, because there is a protective measure within the Trafficking in Persons Prohibition Act that specifically states that persons that were victims will not be charged for immigration offenses.
But how do you get that information to them? If I was smuggled into a country and I'm being forced to do work that I don't want to do, it could be sex work, it could be domestic work, I can't leave, there's a threat on my family back home, or there's a threat to me here, and I know I came into this country legally. Police and immigration, even if my trafficker doesn't tell me, would instill fear in me.
Right.
So how do you get that message out to persons who are victims to understand that under or in Belize, they should not be persecuted if they are trafficking victims?
So right now at the council, we've actually had conversation on how to reach that population.
Yeah.
We recently had a meeting with Belize and Honduras, because most of our victims are coming from the Northern Triangle, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala. And so we had a meeting with the persons responsible for trafficking in persons in Honduras, and we developed some prevention activities to think of how to get information to these populations within both countries so that they understand what their rights are and what the realities look like. And this is what's going to be a part of this awareness campaign that we're currently undergoing, to get the information to the people that really need to hear it. So I brought a lot of things with me today.
Tell us.
So we have developed, well, this is a part of the council for a while. It's a labor laws pamphlet in Spanish and in English.
Okay.
And what we try to ensure that when temporary employment permits are given, these are given within them as well. Because it talks about, well, this one is in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but it talks about their rights, what days they should get off, or what's supposed to be happening, and if that's not happening, who to contact. And we have that in English. And we also have some pamphlets being created on what human trafficking is and we're looking at trying to create it in languages that are spoken in Belize, not just English and Spanish, but Mandarin, and for other communities that are vulnerable. Because we do realize that, a video on a Facebook might not reach a vulnerable person.
Of course, they wouldn't have a phone.
Right, they would have
call for help.
access to that. So we have to develop these, what we would call these obsolete versions. We have to use them for that vulnerable population that only has access to papers.
And they may be watching TV. I mean, this is one opportunity here. Is it often the case that a trafficking victim knows that they're a trafficking victim?
No, that's not always the case, because they're exploiting their vulnerability. And Ms. Kin can tell you this: if somebody grows up in a poor neighborhood or in a very remote village, they're perfect target for a trafficker, because that person doesn't understand how technology works, or they don't understand the reality of the world. So they say, I'm going to take you to a five-star restaurant, and you're going to be able to make this money, provide for your family, and do all these wonderful things, and you end up in Belize and you're making a little bit of money, so you think this is so much better than what I was making back home. Or they come from a country where the labor laws are so different from Belize. So they sign a contract, end up in Belize, and they think everything is fine, not knowing they are being exploited. And so a lot of times they don't understand that they are victims.
For a person that may understand that they are a victim, they're experiencing the real fears, and they perhaps understand the repercussions of coming out and asking for help. How do you assist somebody like that?
Well, what we've been doing trainings with frontline workers.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of them, so kind of taking it in strides. Miss Kane from YS has been doing it.
Yeah. And
You
which
can tell
groups
them
do
a
that
little bit
include,
about-
Karen?
Say?
Which groups do that include? What frontline workers?
Frontline workers usually nurses, especially those in the rural communities, because that's where a lot of the trafficking happens. We usually also look at teachers, because they themselves might come in contact with the children of trafficking victims. But one of the things that I wanted to add that Jana was saying is that, and I think either you or the young man asked the question about how do you help people who are already in, maybe did not get the information, is not aware of their rights, so how do you help that person? And I will tell you this not to sound pessimistic, but it's really and truly very, very difficult, because you remember now the trafficker has that person being watched, being monitored, and all of that, right? So how do I get help? Sometimes in some situations, you might have somehow build a relationship with someone else within that brothel or within that bar or restaurant that probably has a sympathetic heart and would defy their bosses, as to say, to help. Sometimes it might even be your customer who you're servicing. You know, you might slip him a phone number and ask him to make a call on your behalf and things like that. And those are the cases that these people then, if it pans through or comes through, then they are lucky.
Yeah.
But there are some who have been trafficked for years and cannot
Never get out.
Yeah.
get the help. And one of the things that
And the psychological state they must
exactly,
be in.
It traps them.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're...
And so if you look at it carefully, because I was trying to ask Jana a while ago, what are the 3 P's? I know we have 4 P's.
Yes, there's 4 P's.
which is the prevention, the prosecution, partnerships,
And protection.
and protection.
Yes.
And so when these individuals are rescued, what we find challenging in this country is that instead of them wanting to, or maybe they might want to, but in their heads, in their minds, the ultimate goal for them is to return back home as quick as possible. So therefore, I don't want any prosecution, which is where we want them to prosecute, because then it would mean
Want
that
justice.
trafficker, you know, they got justice and we got that person locked up and put away so that they cannot do it to another person.
Yeah.
But their ultimate goal is return me home like yesterday.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and you cannot be upset with them, because at the end of the day, they have been robbed of their dignity, their self-respect, the fact that they have been isolated from friends and parents and children, perhaps, that they left back home. The ultimate is
Or
go
just
back
get
home.
back to safety.
Get back to
that's,
safety.
That's definitely one
Right?
of the biggest. You know, when we do trainings and we explain to the persons that, you know, there's a law that protects migrants for not, you know, to not be prosecuted, and they're like, oh, well, then people are going to take advantage of this law. And it's like, no, you don't realize it. Just like how when you are somewhere you want to come back home, they want to go back home. They don't want to stay in a country that they don't know the people, or they want to go back to their families. But I just want to make sure that I answer your question directly. If somebody realizes that they're being that they're a victim, how do they seek help? They could call Human Services. They could also go to a police station. What we found, if someone goes and reports something to a police station, I know there's a lot to say in regards to that. We're not going to get into that particularly, but we have a unit within the police department that deals directly with trafficking in persons, the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Police Unit. And they are contacted anytime something looks like a trafficking case. and they address the situation. So the
But
police.
does the training for police, because I know you do frontline training, who all is included? Is it just the unit? Because there might be the officer that I meet at the front desk who will just say, oh, you're illegally here. Go ahead.
We're on, I want to mention the International Organization for Migration.
Yes.
They're a big partner for the council, and they are the reason this awareness campaign is happening right now.
Okay.
And alongside them, what we've actually been doing, we've embarked on getting training for all tourism police officers. We're almost at the end. We have a training this Thursday, and that should wrap up 100% of the officers.
Okay.
And I know there are trainings planned on trafficking in persons with the rest of the police department. I'm not sure if it started as yet, but there are plans. Another one of our partners, the Human Trafficking Institute, is taking over that particular training and working with the training academy to get all officers trained. And one of the victories that we've had last year, they incorporated trainings on trafficking in persons within the police training academy.
Fantastic.
So all new police officers will have knowledge on trafficking in persons and the existence of the unit and what to look out for so that they could assist.
I have one final question.
No problem.
In looking at the situation of trafficking. So we talked on different levels. We talked victim. We talked of the state's responsibility to care for victims who are identified. But the persecution is important. And the persecution is important for obvious reasons, like stopping the practice or stopping someone who has the practice, but also globally, it's seen as a development marker. And so we have consistently come under heavy scrutiny because we don't persecute or, in other words, take traffickers to the court system, get them convicted as often as possible. How do we get there? And is it a fair marker to the work that we've been doing with trafficking in persons?
That's a tricky question.
That is a tricky question.
It is a tricky question, but no, definitely.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to shy away from answering that. Persecution, like I said, has to be the victim wants to do it. And most of the time, like I said earlier, they don't want to. I am thinking, and this is just off the top of my head, nobody is saying this to
Not
me at
any
this
position.
to me at this point.
Yeah.
But I'm saying perhaps the state needs to decide, you know what happened? Yes, and perhaps it's there. So if it's there, Jana, you tell me.
No worries.
But if this victim wants to return so badly, then let her. But can we at least gather statements, do
In camera?
video, video
In-camera testimonies.
testimonies that she's there, and even at the point where our intelligence unit can, if she identifies the perpetrator and he's lined up prior to her going, of course, and she would point out and say, that's him or that's her, because we know both women and men are traffickers. And I think we have to start to do more proactive thinking of how to get these victims to really prosecute, because at the end of the day, without being looking as if though we're trying only to accommodate a mandate with our U.S. partners, is to say, yes, this is happening, and we have to do it and in terms of prosecuting our perpetrators on a more level, because that is how we are basically rank. I know they look a lot at
they look mostly at persecution.
persecution.
And every time I see that question, okay, what is the ratio of persons saved from human trafficking versus persons prosecuted?
And if you hear, right, it's very, very minimal.
Yeah.
And for that reason alone that we are citing, yes, but what else can we do? I think we have to look now at the flip side. Okay, yes, the people want to go home. Yes, the people want to forget because it's a traumatic event. But what else can we do to make sure that these perpetrators don't walk away scotch-free?
And that's a reason why the government has started to create these specialized units to address trafficking, to help us increase prosecution, because it's a collaborative effort. It starts all the way from protection, from identifying all the way to protection that gives a successful case. And so the police unit was established in 2018, 2019. So it's just recently that was established. What we've done, we have a Justice Moore, set her as the only judge that hears all trafficking cases because she understands the human rights aspect of everything. And so we have social workers that we've identified, these are the 2 social workers that will deal with trafficking cases. And so we're moving towards an era of training everyone, but having persons that are specialized to deal with it. And we're seeing how that might assist us in getting successful prosecution. I think one of the success stories from this year actually is that the Guatemalan young lady that was found as victim in January, February of this year, that case is already waiting to be go before the court. So that is happening at a fast rate because those persons, from the start of identifying to investigating, are working collaboratively. So we're looking forward to seeing more of that as we encounter more, as we push for more specialization in the government as we respond to trafficking.
Just one final question and to add a tad bit there, but without downplaying the seriousness of trafficking, it appears in a sense that it's a supply. And the supply that exists because there is a demand.
Precisely.
And perhaps that is a call for a change or a shift in culture and behavior among our country, among our countrymen, women, etc. But my simple question is, me as an untrained, ordinary person who have this information at hand, how can I help? What can I do when I identify one of these persons?
So how can you help? We don't want anybody to investigate on their own. They could be putting themselves in danger. So there are ways that you can report anonymously, and that is through Crime Stoppers. We often advertise it because we feel it's important to encourage people to feel safe that, if I say something, this will not reach back to me, especially in a small country like Belize. So you can call Crime Stoppers at 922. You don't have to call the 0800 number anymore, just 922. Or there's an app that you can report on via the P3 Tips app. And you choose your country, you can report any crime on it actually, not just human trafficking. And nothing comes back to you. It doesn't ask for your name, your email address, your phone number, nothing. You just use a 4-digit code to enter in. It's available on iOS and Android, and you don't have to be connected to anything. And I want to emphasize, we don't want anybody to investigate. Don't try and go closer to take a picture.
Or ask them.
Or ask anybody questions. Yes, if you somehow end up having a conversation with somebody very casually and you think something is wrong, you can report that, but please don't put yourself in danger, because we don't want our Belizean people to, there are people out there that can do this job. And just to put in, this is why we're doing this awareness campaign, the poster. And I'll start off with the fact that the cash prize is $500.
Okay.
We've gotten we've gotten a lot of people actually being interested in participating. And it is to encourage the population to discover what trafficking is and to get our artsy people in our community to depict what it looks like, and it will help bring awareness to this issue that is actually happening in Belize and start more conversations.
And if someone's at a home, I can't say they're home right now, but at a home or in a room and has heard this conversation and thinks, this is what's happening to me. I don't have control of my life. What can you tell them to do right now?
Call 911. Yes, I can't emphasize it enough. If you call 911 and tell them you believe that you're being trafficked and you need someone from the Ethics Police Unit to come and check, there will be a response.
Okay.
Or if you want to preferably call DHS and tell them DHS works closely with the Ethics Police Unit, and they will also respond.
Yeah. And you will not be arrested for
You will not be arrested, no.
For sex work, for anything else.
Because at the end of the day, we want to protect people that are being exploited. People are not property, so maybe the trafficker brought them across the border illegally, but they did not do that on their own intent or their own decision. They were forced. And so we don't want to continue to perpetrate this thing and continue to control them and force them. So we want to, our intention is to protect and put them in a safe space.
All right.
Okay. All right, so with that, we'll take another break and we will be right back. So stay tuned.